Hey everybody, Robin from Backscatter here.
Jim from Backscatter here.
And in the studio today, we've got the new Sony A7R5. This is the newest full-frame mirrorless camera from Sony, and Jim just got back from shooting this on his latest adventure. Jim, what's this camera all about?
Well, A7R5 is Sony's latest camera in the high-resolution lineup. 61 megapixel sensor. It is the same sensor as the previous A7R4, but there's been tons of upgrades in a lot of the other areas of the camera, such as massively improved autofocus, better video specs, new processor, updated white balance capability that's similar to the other Sony cameras you've been reviewing lately. So all around, it's a pretty serious upgrade.
Right on. That sounds like we got a lot to talk about. Let's dive in and figure out everything that underwater photographers need to know. Within the A7 camera lineup, there's a whole bunch of different cameras. We've got most of them here in front of us. Where does the A7R5 fit into the current Sony lineup?
So there's basically, in the A7 lineup, there's 3 different cameras. They have a base model, which tends to be entry level on features and price. Then you have an S model, which is more video centric, has a lower resolution sensor, faster readout, much better for video. Then you have the R series. The R series is for resolution. And that's where you're going to get the highest resolution sensor, is the ultimate photo camera, better than any other photo camera as far as quality coming out there for full frame in DSLR or mirrorless. Then they have, outside of that, they have another camera called the A1. That's kind of a combo of the best video and the best photo all wrapped up into one.
But I understand that kind of has the price tag to come along with it too.
It does, yes. It's a few $1,000s, meaning like $3,000 more than most of the other things in the lineup.
If you want to see how the A7R5 stacks up to any of the other current Sony full-frame mirrorless cameras, we have reviews on each of those. We'll leave those linked in the description of this video. So let's talk about the image quality first here. You said the R stands for resolution. Let's start with that. How much resolution does it have? How sharp are these shots?
It's a 61 megapixel sensor in A7R5, which is the same as the previous model. Same sensor, same resolution. So we didn't get an upgrade there, but it's kind of like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The colors look fantastic. Dynamic range is great. The amount of detail you get when you zoom in 1:1 in Lightroom is absolutely fantastic. So not all broken up about not being like all new sensor or anything like that.
Sure.
It's great. There's plenty of other features that we'll get into later as to why you want this camera.
I mean, if memory serves, I think we called the A7R4 one of, basically the best image quality you could get from a camera at that time. So sounds like it still maintains that title.
It does. There's nothing in the full frame category that is going to best this camera at this point.
That's like mirrorless or SLR. This is the top spot.
That's correct.
So it's not that uncommon for there to be a trade-off between high resolution and low light performance. Getting a shot that has a ton of resolution may also get a lot of noise at higher ISO values. So how did this do?
This did excellent, just like its predecessor. The Sony sensors are backside illuminated, so by doing that, they're able to have a lower noise floor to them. When we shot this previously, image quality, noise level was great, dynamic range was great, and it's the same on the A7R5. With this one, I was shooting an image at ISO 1000, and when I was shooting that, when you zoom into it, you look at it, you see some grain. You don't really see much noise per se. I guess that's the noise at this point, is the grain. But it kind of looked like film grain, kind of like ISO 400 film grain, not like ISO 800 film grain, which I think is much more pronounced.
You didn't find it was like detracting from the image at all?
No, not at all. And if I took that image and printed it and blowed it up like huge, you wouldn't see that at all. It'd be a really clean image, and I've done that before.
Let's talk about the shooting speed here. How does this thing handle that?
Well, one would think with a 61 megapixel sensor that shooting speed would be compromised on this. However, this will do 10 frames per second, albeit in a lossy RAW format, which is still pretty darn quick for as much file size as what you're pulling down with this thing. That being said, you can shoot a lossless RAW in around 7 frames per second. Now, if you're an underwater photographer using strobes, that's still going to be more speed than you would ever need to keep up with your strobes. Your strobes are going to be your limiting factor there. However, if you're not using strobes and let's say you're doing fast action, or maybe you're doing sports photography or being in a bait ball, a lot of action with no strobes, then maybe it might be a little limiting to you. But if you really need super, super fast shooting speed, then you want to bump up to the A1, and that'll do 20 to 30 frames per second.
When it comes to the autofocus, how did it feel? How did it respond? And did you feel any of that new performance that they talk about?
Massively. It's not even in comparison to the old camera.
Okay.
I mean, it's the old camera. I hate to say it for the people that had the A7R4, but on the macro side, it was like a joke. With the Sony 90, if you had anything that was anywhere near 1:1 on your macro, you're like doing life size towards the minimum focus distance of the lens. It would just hunt. You just it wouldn't lock on to anything. It was so bad that we used to tell people, to shoot like the Canon 100 with a Metabones adapter because that would actually perform better. I always thought the problem was a Sony 90 lens until we started getting into some newer cameras and more improved AF. Well, now with this AF, it's so massively improved. They have a whole new AI engine in the camera specifically dedicated towards focus, that I can just say now that this is probably the best focusing camera that I've used.
Awesome. Wow, big claim.
Yeah, so that being said, on the wide angle side of things, are you gonna see a difference between an A7R4 and A7R5?
That's not really where it's struggling.
That's not where it's at. Cameras don't struggle with fisheye focus that often.
Right.
Yeah, so let's get that right out of the way. It's the macro side that is the autofocus test. What I did with this one is I used the animal eye detect.
How does that work?
Well, basically the way I set it up was I do AFC or continuous focus, and I'd use tracking, and I'd put a square in the center. I would then aim the camera at the part of the subject I wanted to be in focus, and then I would activate focus by using the AF on button.
So you're just aiming at the eye and it's
Correct.
Looking for that.
And what happens is when you start doing that, it starts to move around a little bit, the focus point, and then it'll recognize the eye and just locks straight onto the eye and follows the eye. And it would even follow the eye even through a diopter, which is probably the worst or best autofocus test you could ever do for a camera lens combination. It did this in such a crazy manner that when it detected something that had eyes, and I was just kind of like looking at one eye, it would actually draw a rectangle around both eyes and track both eyes as the subject moved through the frame.
That's really cool.
So it was very, very good at detecting eyes and following those. So I would say this is excellent autofocus system. Can't state enough how big of an upgrade it is from the A7R4.
Safe to say it might even be our new gold standard for underwater autofocus?
I would think so. That being said, I do want to throw a little caveat in there that I didn't have a lot of macro on this trip. I was in Raja Ampat in Indonesia, doing mostly wide angle, but I did get in for a few macro dives and was very impressed by it. I'm looking forward to shooting it a lot more.
On basically every mirrorless camera, we got to talk about that electronic viewfinders. That's always something that stands out in comparison to an SLR's optical viewfinder. How did this one do?
This one did very good. It's probably about the same as what I experienced with the Sony A1, which is one of their newer cameras. The challenge of an optical viewfinder is dynamic range. It doesn't have the dynamic range of the human eye, which is the advantage of having an optical viewfinder that you mentioned earlier. So with this, typically those type of shots that are difficult to frame are going to be ones where you have like a sunball in the background and then you're trying to have a foreground subject as well. You can't make out both of them typically with an electronic viewfinder. This one I would say that you can at this point. Previous Sony cameras, like a couple years ago, it was still difficult. You could either see the sunball, but you can't see the front subject because the front foreground subject would just be in complete shadow. Or it was the other way around. You could see the foreground subject, but the background was completely blown out. You have no idea where the sunball is.
Right.
So this one, I could actually see both the foreground subject and sunball in high dynamic range situations. So definitely good kudos to Sony for this viewfinder.
Nice. So it's still not quite optical SLR, but about as good as it gets on a mirrorless, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, you're never going to get to that point on a viewfinder. I know that's an absolutist kind of thing to say, but you're talking the difference between looking at a digital screen and looking with your own eye through optics.
Tell me about your underwater photo master secrets of the pros here for making the most out of this viewfinder performance-wise.
So this kind of applies to all mirrorless cameras, the way I set things up for them, because I'm used to an SLR with an optical viewfinder where I can be ready to shoot any given time because I'm looking through at the subject all the time. If I want to look at the image, I can look at the screen. The way mirrorless cameras come set up right out of the box is for an image view of around 2 seconds. And that just kills your shooting speed because it comes up, it's in the viewfinder, you're like, I want to see what I'm shooting real quick. So what I do is I turn the automatic playback off completely. I don't do any image review whatsoever. Then what I do is I set up C3, which is your left button or for your thumb on the camera to be viewfinder and screen toggle. So that way, if I wanted to look at the screen for some reason, I can. But otherwise, if I want to look at an image I just took, I'll hit the playback button. Most housings, playback button is pretty ergonomically placed, so you can quickly take a look if you need to, and then come right back out of it. Either hit the playback button again, tap the shutter, whatever you need to do, then you'll come back out of it. But the key is being able to shoot quickly. And if you can't shoot quickly, you're not going to get the shot. So being able to see through the viewfinder at all times and bang off a lot of shots, that's how you're going to get the shot. And that's why I set the viewfinder up like that.
Tell me about the lenses that you shot on this thing. What'd you choose?
Well, I shot the 8-15 Canon with a Sigma MC11 adapter. There's also other adapters available for it, such as Metabones. The Metabones adapter will allow you to do autofocus in video, whereas the MC11 won't. That's the only one I had available to me at the time, so that's the one I shot on the trip, is the MC11.
Okay.
For macro, I shot the 90 macro lens. And then the other lens I shot on this trip was the Sony kit lens, the 28-70, behind the Nauticam WACP-C, which we affectionately call the WACP-C. It's a compact version of the WACP-1.
Tell me a little bit about your experience shooting the WACP-C versus the WACP-1. What would you choose on this camera?
Yeah, for this particular camera, I'd definitely go with the 1. The 1 is a higher grade lens. You've got 61 megapixels of resolution and detail in this. And what I noticed is on the WACP-C, I needed to shoot that thing at like f11, f16 to really get sharper corners. Whereas the WACP-1, I could shoot that thing at like f5, 6 and still have good corners. Now, if I took one of those WACP-C pictures and just put it on the internet in average size, are you going to see any flaws? No. It's just when you go into one-to-one in Lightroom, you're going to see those, the corners in there aren't quite as sharp as what you would get on a WACP-1. So for that reason, I highly recommend the WACP-1 for use with this camera over the C.
Tell me about the underwater housings for this camera. What's available for us?
Well, everybody's going to do something for this camera because it's going to be pretty popular. So we already have Icolite and Nauticam out, some others along the way. We've got stuff from CNC, Soda, Aquatica, and Seacam.
Hey everybody, hope you're enjoying this video. You know, you can join our family by buying your underwater photo and video gear from us here at Backscatter. Every purchase includes free lifetime tech support, will beat any price, hands down, and we ship worldwide daily. Our in-house authorized warranty service center has you covered for any maintenance and repairs. Here at Backscatter, we dive, shoot, and service everything we sell. Whether you're point and shoot or professional, we look forward to helping you meet your underwater imaging goals. Now back to the video. We've been talking almost this entire time about how great this is as a photo camera, so let's get into the video side of things. You said it's got some pretty big improvements. What can it do?
Yeah, first off, the video spec 4K 60. is an improvement over the previous model, the A7R4, which only shot 4K 30. I like the 4K 60. I think that's the minimum floor now for something to be considered a half-serious video camera. Because the 4K 60, what you can do is you can slow it down to 30, so you can lengthen your clips by double, get a nice dreamy slow-mo kind of effect. And if you have any wobbles while you're shooting video, those kind of smooth right out when you slow it down. And if you play 4K 60 on a 4K 60 TV, you get this like hyper real kind of look to it that's very cool.
You mentioned at the beginning of the video that this camera has some seriously improved white balance. We know that color is basically the most important aspect of video. So did Sony get it right again on this thing?
Yeah, they did. And like we said before, if you've been following us for years, if the color ain't right, nothing else matters. You gotta nail the color in camera, in video. And for this ambient light, white balance for wide angle video, this thing is now on par with what the other Sony cameras are doing ever since the A7S3 came out with its improved white balance. And it's on par now with Canon as well, which has been the gold standard for underwater color for custom white balance. For sure, this is now light years ahead of the previous Sony A7R4, which, to be honest, it was massively lacking in that purpose. You can only shoot very, very shallow, like 20 feet-ish or so. Yeah, massive improvement over the previous model.
So how'd you get set for success focus-wise when shooting video?
Yeah, so most of the video I shot was with either the 8-15 or the WACP-C. One thing you gotta note is if you're using the 8-15 with an adapter, the Metabones adapter will allow you to do autofocus in video, whereas the Sigma one will not allow you to do focus in video. The way I would recommend people set up autofocus for this particular camera is to set it so that you are in manual focus for video and have the AF on button set for focus. Because when you're in manual focus, if you hit the AF on button, it will actually do AFS. And the best way to shoot, I think, any camera underwater for video is to focus on your scene first and then roll. You don't want the camera autofocusing when you're rolling footage, because it'll hunt and have some focus blips and shifts all over the place, and that ruins your shot. So all this talk of like, well, it'll follow, an eye or a head or whatever topside, that may be great for your cat videos, but for underwater, that'll ruin your scene. So I like to lock it down, set my focus either on my fin or on the scene, and then roll video.
Are there any little need-to-know things, any caveats about shooting video on this? Because it seems like Sony's already got a pretty sweet video-centric camera. What's the drawback?
Yeah, it's almost too good to be true. One of the drawbacks is that when it shoots 4K 60, it is a 1.24 crop of the sensor.
Okay.
So you are narrowing your angle of coverage there. So I would recommend shooting it with like the 8-15 for wide angle, which most photo shooters, that's what their lenses are going to have on anyway.
Just to get as wide as possible.
We'll get as wide as possible. I'll narrow in a little bit. So it could be seen as a little bit of a benefit because I know video shooters don't typically like to shoot fisheye wide. So this will knock it down a little bit. The other caveat to it is the rolling shutter, because this is a 61 megapixel sensor. There's loads of data coming off of this thing, and the read speeds aren't fast enough to prevent rolling shutter in extreme situations. So if you're doing like really fast, hard pans, you might see some of that rolling shutter effect. But if you keep it nice and steady, slow moving things, then you're not gonna see it. But if you need higher performance, other Sony cameras in the lineup will deliver the higher readout speeds.
Talk to me about the controls and the settings in shooting video. What did you notice jumping from photo to video mode?
Well, a very cool thing they have in the menu is to have the option to synchronize or keep different settings for photo versus video. So for example, like your shutter speed, aperture, those kind of controls. So what I did in the video side of things, I decided to do separate settings for shutter speed, aperture, ISO, exposure compensation, white balance, and focus.
Okay.
So the reasoning behind that is if you're taking photos as a photographer, you're really dialed in on what you got going on for your settings. Typically, In photo, your backgrounds are going to be anywhere from 1 to 2 stops underexposed to get that nice deep blue color for your ambient light. You're using strobes, or usually using auto white balance, shooting raw. So drastically different settings than you would be doing for video. So in video, typically your shutter is going to be double your frame rate. So if you're at 60, you're going to be at 1/125th of a second for your shutter speed. You'll never change that. Whereas in photo, you're changing it all the time.
Right.
With video, a lot of times you tend to be a little bit further back from some things. You might be getting like an entire scene. So I typically set video for f8 to start with. And it might sound counterintuitive, but for exposure, I set my ISO to auto with a negative 0.7 exposure adjustment for it, for exposure compensation. That way it knocks down the highlights a little bit, because HD TVs and 4K TVs tend to over sharpen and over contrast scenes. So if you shoot right on the meter, dead on, then typically it comes out blown out on those screens. So that's why I go negative 0.7, good kind of baseline for that. And then white balance, I set up so that I'm on one of the custom settings already. That way, if I need to pick up a new one, I can use the C1 button, which is what I programmed for white balance. I'll hit that one as my custom white balance, and then I can execute quickly within like 2 or so presses and be good to go. Or I can have any one of 3 banks in there for custom white balance. So I can have like a shallow one, a deep one, or one with lights, whatever your kind of shooting style is. Have one in the can if you want to go to it really quick without having to execute, but executing is pretty quick on this camera to do. So that way I can just flick the switch from photo to video and be only a couple button presses away from being able to just go right in and roll a video. So I think it does lend towards hybrid shooting quite well that way.
One of the most recent reviews we did was for the Sony A7 IV, the base model in the A7 lineup, and we talked a lot about how great that is as a hybrid photo video camera. Now this camera has a lot more going on in the video side than it did before. How do those things stack up? Is this a fair competition as far as a hybrid shooter goes?
Well, as far as a hybrid shooter goes, they'll both do 4K 60, and they both have the great underwater white balance. So that's great. The A7 IV, the base model, is less expensive as well, but only by about $1,000 or so. I know that's a lot of money to a lot of people, and if it was my money, I would be probably eating a lot of ramen and spaghetti to move up to the A7R5. Because at the end of the day, if you think about it, your cost of an underwater system, between these two cameras, the only difference is the camera. The housings are roughly the same price. The lenses are the same, ports are the same, strobes, arms, cables, travel gear, everything you need. It's all going to be the same. The only difference in price is going to be between the two cameras. When you look at the transaction total for all of that, not saying $1,000+ is insignificant, but if you're going to sink some money into a system, why not go for the best one?
Right.
So I think between the image quality, light years ahead, it's more than double the resolution, or almost double the resolution. The autofocus capability, A7 IV is good, but this is even that much better.
Jim, it sounds like we've kind of hit all the major points of this thing in this review. So bring it all back around for me and tell me, who is the Sony A7R5 really for? Who needs to be the most excited about this camera?
I think anybody who is interested in high quality, high resolution still photography, that is who this is for the photographer. The detail that you get from this sensor is unparalleled. You can crop verticals out of horizontals all day long and still plenty of resolution to blow it up big. You can shoot fast with it, as fast as you ever want to with strobes. The autofocus, I mean, man, that was severely improved. I can't say enough about the autofocus. So even if you have the previous camera, if autofocus is important to you, that alone is worth the upgrade. Then, the video side of things, very surprising now that we're actually able to shoot kind of hybrid-like with this camera, having the 4K 60 video spec, and having the ability to do a really great underwater custom white balance, puts it into the territory of being somewhat of a hybrid camera. That being said, if you're more serious about the video side of things, you still might want to look at some other cameras because of the rolling shutter and also the crop you get with 4K 60, 1.24 crop we talked about earlier. So you need to keep that in mind.
Is there anything else people that are shopping for this might want to take a hard look at?
Yeah, I also think the Sony A1. That one, albeit it is almost $3,000 more.
Right.
So that's quite a bit of ramen and spaghetti for quite some time. You do get faster shooting speed with that one with 20 to 30 frames per second. You also get 4K 120 video with a much faster readout sensor. So the video is going to be quite a bit improved from that. You can slow 4K 120 down to 4K 60 and still have, smooth motion. You can even go quarter speed on it and look great. So I still think the A7R5 is going to have better image quality than the A1 from what I've seen so far. But that being said, it's not going to be light years ahead of the A1. I still think that is a great camera. And the aspect of having a 1/400 flash sync speed, be able to get some more light from your strobes onto the scene, as opposed to only 1/250 on this one, is another factor to look at in your decision whether you go for an A7R5 or Sony A1. I think another option for a camera, if you're really serious about video, is taking a hard look at the R5C from Canon. That's a cinema camera of the R5 model. So it'll do 45 megapixel stills, even though it's a cinema camera. It won't operate any differently than your regular R5, but you can do 8K 60 and 4K 120 with that camera, and it'll shoot all day long if you're using an external battery pack to the camera. Like, for example, Nauticam has extra space inside the housing for an external battery pack that will, I say external, but it's external to the camera. It's inside the housing. You run all day long on that and has a fan in the back, so overheating is not an issue. And then you get 45 megapixel stills and 45 megapixel video as well, which is pretty nuts when you think about it. The other thing it has is one-touch white balance on it, which is great for hybrid shooter. You just flick over to video, doink, you hit it, done, there's your white balance. And we've already talked about how great Canon white balance is. So if you're really looking at a system to be the ultimate hybrid shooter where great stills, great video, that's another one to take a look at. So to wrap it up, I do think that the stills photographers, who's this aimed at, but now you get the extra added bonus of having some opportunities to pick up some pretty killer video on your trip if you want to as well.
Yeah, something that we never had out of this camera before. I think that's fantastic. Well, thanks very much, Jim. That was an awesome review. You had some great stuff out of this camera. Can't wait to see what you do with it next.
Yeah, I'm excited for my next trip.
Well, if you want to learn more about the A7R5, we got way more information on backscatter.com. You can also check out all of the reviews on any other Sony cameras. We'll leave all those linked down there. And remember, if you like this video, you can help us keep making more of them by buying your underwater camera gear from us here at Backscatter. We dive, shoot, and service everything we sell. We offer free lifetime tech support with every purchase, and we ship internationally every day. I'm Robin from Backscatter, signing off.
I'm Jim from Backscatter, signing off.
And we'll catch you on the next one.